Mr. Secretary, you've been a strong proponent of a substantial infrastructure investment in this country. It is sort of stuck at the moment up on Capitol Hill. I wonder, from your perspective, are the chances of getting a substantial infrastructure package through less because we're spending so much time first on funding the government and then on this debt ceiling issue?
Well, I think we could certainly do without this debt ceiling issue. I mean, this should be a bipartisan vote. Certainly, there should not be a filibuster of the full faith and credit of the United States, but it sounds like there's progress there. What I will say, though, is that the momentum behind this infrastructure package, I think, really transcends a lot of the other politics of the day. You can see that in the bipartisan vote that helped get it to this point. You can also see it around the country. You know, people everywhere are very much mindful of how America has fallen behind and how America would be better off if we invested in our roads and bridges and our ports and airports, new forms of infrastructure like internet access. That is the president's vision, and that we have this rarest of things, which is Democrats and Republicans, even in Washington, agreeing that we've got to do it. That's why I think it's going to happen. And at the moment that the president signs it, my department will be getting to work making sure that we can responsibly deploy those taxpayer dollars, which will obviously be a major task and a welcome task for us to work on.
In order to get important things done in Washington, you have to have politics. Some people think it's a dirty word. It's actually what we have in a democracy. But how important is it to get that infrastructure done this year? Because next year, as you know, is an election year.
Well, look, the right time to do something like this was always yesterday. We're dealing with the consequences of about 40 years of disinvestment in the infrastructure that we count on to stay competitive. And again, I think there's an awareness of that really cuts across politics. So, we definitely need to get this done. The sooner that legislation is done, the sooner we can get to work and actually work with our state and local partners and get those dollars out to where they need to be.
So let's talk about some of the aspects of infrastructure specific to your department. And let's talk, first of all, about what I think I can call a crisis with our ports right now on the West Coast and the East Coast, when we have all those ships lined up trying to offload. And by the way, we don't have the trucks to get the stuff off the ports anyway. What can you do about that problem?
So this is a challenge that really stretches across the entire supply chain. If you think about it, if the ships are there, then actually the ships are not where the entirety of the issue lies. It's really everything in between. In addition to issues in shipping, it's everything in between that ship that's waiting for its chance to come into port and the shelf where that product is supposed to wind up in the end. That means the ports themselves. It means rail. It means trucking. It means everything in the movement of those goods. And we do believe there's a role for the federal government to play to help smooth out some of these supply chain issues. It's largely a private sector system. But when the president signed the executive order early this year, when we brought together the White House task force on supply chain disruptions that's working as we speak to continue addressing these, what we found is that we can play a role as a kind of honest broker, bringing together a lot of the key players in order to take away some of the obstacles to things moving smoothly. For example, the ports of LA and Long Beach recently announced an expansion in access and their hours. That's one thing that can reduce the bottlenecks. We are funding, of course, as a department, a lot of work on the rails, on the roads, and supporting trucking, which is also a big issue. We've got some real challenges on the labor side with the turnover of truck drivers that can make it harder to get goods to where they need to go. So yes, it's complex. Yes, it's global. Yes, it's largely private sector. But we know that there is a lot that we can do in this administration. And that's exactly what the White House has been challenging my department and other departments to step up and do.
When we read the media, and I understand media sometimes can overhype it, we hear about that Christmas might be in jeopardy. By the way, not just in the United States, we read about it in Germany as well. What is the risk that we will not have the goods on the shelves for Christmas?
Well, look, what we know is that there are short-term actions that we can take that are making a difference already. We just saw, for example, a considerable reduction in the dwell time on rail, the transfer to rail at those ports of LA and Long Beach. By the way, those two ports alone represent about 40% of our containerized traffic. Some of this is a bigger picture, longer term issue that's going to take years and years to address. It goes to the very foundations of how our trade works. But what we're seeing is that piled up next to an issue created by the recovery from the pandemic. We have record traffic at some of these container ports. Part of what's happened is, as people's incomes have returned, they're spending that income less on things like going to crowded theaters or restaurants compared to on physical goods, which puts a lot of pressure on our shipping and supply chain resources. So these challenges are definitely going to continue in the months and the years ahead. But we're wasting no time in taking steps that are going to make a difference right away. There's even an envoy whose full attention is on this now, a highly respected former deputy secretary from my department, John Percari, who has been working with this White House level task force that I'm co-chairing along with Secretary Vilsack, our agriculture secretary, and Secretary Raimondo, our commerce secretary, to really identify those short-term as well as long-term steps we need to take. The last thing I would add is just this is one more reason why we do need to deliver this infrastructure package so that we can have a more resilient and flexible physical infrastructure to support our supply chain in this country.
Just exactly what I was going to ask, because as you suggested, there's a short term and there's a medium or long term aspect to this. You're doing what you can, I guess, in the short term. Explain, if you had the infrastructure package signed today, what would be the medium and long term effects on the problem we're talking about right now with the ports, with the rail system, with trucking?
Well, what we would have is a system that could more flexibly adapt to the challenges of tomorrow. I don't think anybody could have seen the level of impact, negative impact that the COVID pandemic had, but also a lot of the challenges are actually from the level at which income bounced back. And so as you have these shocks and fluctuations, and we don't know by definition what some of the future ones are going to be, what we do know is that when we invest in our ports, and there are billions to support our ports in this package, when we invest in rail safety and efficiency, when we invest in the roads that our trucks go on, and by the way, we should be investing in the labor side. In fact, right now we're teaming up with the Department of Labor to support pathways to apprenticeships to help support that need for more people in the trucking profession. All of those things give us a more resilient and flexible supply chain, no matter what the challenges of tomorrow are going to be, in addition to the challenges that we know of right now that we're facing and wrangling with in the short term.
Mr. Secretary, I wonder how you square two priorities of yours and as well as of President Biden's. On the one hand, infrastructure, the real need to build that up. On the other, the climate, because a lot of the investment in infrastructure is going to lead to cement, it's going to lead to steel, lead to things that are not particularly green, quite the reverse.
Here's how I think of it. So transportation in the U.S. economy is the single biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, to me, that means we have to be and can be one of the biggest parts of the solution. And one of the exciting things about the president's vision, and I think about this infrastructure package and the companion, the rest of the Build Back Better agenda, is it breaks this idea that you got to choose between economic activity and infrastructure or doing the right thing on climate, and really fuses them together. A good example is the investments we're making in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We know that in order to meet our goals and meet our needs for electrification of cars and trucks, we've got to have more of a charging network around this country, and the bill contains the provisions to do just that. There are extraordinary things happening in unsexy areas of infrastructure development like cement and concrete. You mentioned finding actually carbon negative ways to do that. We're in conversations with the aviation sector about sustainable aviation fuels, since we're going to see more and more electric cars on the road long before anybody comes up with an electric alternative to a jet engine. So we got to make sure that the fuels that go into that are more efficient. We have to regard transportation policy and infrastructure policy and climate policy as really being one and the same. And you're going to see that reflected as we prepare for the international COP26 talks in Glasgow next month, and really throughout this administration in this decade.
You are the Secretary of Transportation. You're not the Secretary of Defense. At the same time, you're one of, I think, the few senior officials who actually served in Afghanistan. You did a tour of duty over there. There's going to be a lot of time to think about what went wrong, who did what, when. I wonder, though, are there any lessons you think that we could learn from your experience in Afghanistan as you talk to your buddies over there?
You know, I think people will probably spend the next 20 years picking apart the last 20 years of war and what that conflict meant and what the lessons learned are. I've been thinking about it largely in personal terms, being in touch with friends who were there, thinking about how it shaped the course of our lives. how the chain of events that began 20 years ago with 9/11 changed everything for my generation, including the fact that so many of us went to Afghanistan and served there. This is, I think, something that we will, I think everybody in my generation just assumes everybody understands as kind of a founding or foundational event. Now that I'm a parent, I'm thinking about the fact that 9/11 will be as distant to my children as the Kennedy assassination was to me and somebody born when I was. And so we've got a lot of work to do, I think, to absorb the lessons of everything that's happened in the last 20 years. And again, I think about it mostly just in terms of the faces of the people that I was with over there, Afghan and American.